True or false, there are 35 million people around the world living with HIV. Could you just raise your hand if you think that's true? You are very right. There are 35 million scattered throughout the world. Not evenly, poverty and deprivation show higher numbers of people living with HIV. HIV was first diagnosed in 1981. That's 33 years ago. Globally, they no longer massive increases. In the early years, the numbers went up dramatically, but year on year now, it's starting to decline. We're not on the downhill yet. There is still growth year on year, but you can see with 2.1 million new infections and 1.5 million deaths, it's not as big as it used to be. True or false, Asia is the continent which is most affected by HIV. What do you think? Hands up if you think that's true. If you were paying attention to slide number 2, you might have a clue. Do you think it's true? Come on, have a guess. Hands up if it's true. Oh, 1 or 2 trues. Actually, it's sub-Saharan Africa. 2/3 of people living with HIV live in sub-Saharan Africa. 5,000 people who are living with HIV are here in Scotland and 90,000 in the UK. These figures are quite amazing. 24.7 million people in one continent. It is a big continent, but we can guess that poverty plays a massive role in that figure. True or false? HIV slowly destroys a person's immune system. Hands up if you think it's true. Yeah, lots of hands up in the air there. HIV slowly destroys the body's immune system. It makes people more susceptible to infections that you and I can fight off without any bother. Thrush, colds, flus, all these things cause a great problem because the immune system is low, and eventually the immune system is so low that it leads to the acquired immune deficiency syndrome. True or false, can you tell someone's HIV positive by just looking at them? Hands up if it's true. Oh, thank goodness, a sea of no hands. There are no outward signs of HIV. You can't tell by looking at someone. It's many, many, many years before there are any visible symptoms. Can you catch HIV by holding hands or hugging? Hands up if you think you can. Fantastic. Only by the transference of body fluids can you catch HIV. That happens if we have unprotected sex, if we share needles, in contaminated blood transfusions. Thankfully, around the world, most places are able to check their blood transfusions well. That's not such a big problem, but not everywhere. From mother to child, during pregnancy, during delivery, or immediately after the birth. The number of children born with HIV has decreased by 50% over the past 10 years. Can it be true? Can there be some good news here? What do you think? Hands up if you think it's true. Yeah, you're right. It's down by 58% since 2002. Only 240,000 new infections in children in 2013. Only 240,000. It's a big number. Most people who are HIV positive know their status. What do you think? I've already given you the answer, haven't I? Yeah. Here in Britain, we said 5,000 people in Scotland, didn't we? A quarter of those will not know they are HIV positive. That's 1,250. That's a lot of people who don't know. Globally, the numbers are even worse. 52%. So that's 19 million people out of the 35 million we spoke about at the beginning. 19 million. That's so many. This country, here in Scotland, we've got 5.25 million people. So that's almost 3.5 times the whole population of our country don't know they're HIV positive. Just think, if we could reach those 19 million, it would make such a great difference. Why do these people not know? Well, it's stigma. Could I ask you to shake the hand of the person next to you, please? What if that person next to you told you that they were HIV positive? How would you feel? Now, you were all well educated and knew that HIV isn't passed that way, but stigma can make such a difference to people's lives. We need to change that. You're the guys to do it. Thank you.
Again, nice to see you all. And I'm going to give you a 5 minutes whistle-stop tour of malaria. Now, before we get on to that, little quiz, 2 questions. One has an answer and the other I want you to think about. First question, what is the most dangerous animal in the world? Shout them out. Honey badgers, buffaloes, koala bears, mosquitoes, of course. That is absolutely true. Mosquitoes, easily the most dangerous animal in the world, kills so many people. You're going to be bombarded with statistics today. There's going to be one statistic I'm going to tell you I really want you to remember. But why is it that over 90% of malaria deaths happen in Africa? That's your question to ponder as we go through the rest of the day. Why should that be? Are the mosquitoes more dangerous there? Maybe they're the mama of all mosquitoes in Africa. Why would it be 90% of all malaria deaths happen in Africa? So, remember the boy who fell out of the tree? That story taught me a lot about malaria, because on the one hand, it's really simple. It's obvious. Malarias bite people. When they bite people, they pass the malaria parasite into the bloodstream, and then people get malaria. It's not rocket science. And what does malaria, what symptoms does it cause? Well, it's a horrible illness, high temperatures, it can cause vomiting, it can cause seizures, it can cause weakness. There's some of the most dangerous type of malaria can kill people in 2 or 3 days unless they get prompt treatment. But there's other types that can cause people to be ill for weeks and months at a time and make them extremely weak and end up killing them as well. The crucial thing is that patients really need to seek help promptly, quickly, get the right treatment, and that's where the problem lies. You also need to get the right diagnosis, because temperature, aches and pains, sickness, we've probably all had that, but none of us have had malaria probably. It's like the flu, it's like the cold, it's like all sorts of other fever-type illnesses. So you need good diagnosis, and you need some people who can diagnose quickly. Now, here is the figure I want you to remember, because I could tell you stats after stats. Half the world's population at risk of malaria. That's 3.2 billion. In 2012, they said that well over 200 million people had actually caught malaria. And in 2012, they said 627,000 people actually died of malaria. Compare that with Ebola, 2,600 so far. But 627,000 people died of malaria, and it's totally preventable. In Sierra Leone, it's the commonest cause of death. And as I said, 90% of all deaths happen in Africa. In the year 2000, a child died of malaria every 45 seconds. Today, a child dies every minute, every 60 seconds. It's improving. Woo. Every minute a child dies of malaria, and it's so preventable, it's not true. What about nets? Andy Murray's got a charity about nets, and nets actually work, especially if you get the long-lasting insecticide-impregnated nets. They stop malaria cases by 50%. If you get the diagnostic tests, the proper treatment, and education to help people understand what really matters in preventing malaria, how much more could be done? So this net, one net, it can actually prevent malaria in a number of different people all at once. Because the families that I met in Sierra Leone, they all sleep together. There could be 3 or 4 people under one net. And the fact is, if a mosquito even touches the net, it dies. And the net can last up to 4 to 5 years. How much do you think it costs? £1. You're not far off, actually. I thought maybe about £15. £1, 83 pence on average for a net that can save lives. There are a lot of charities that actually are leading the fight by providing nets for communities in Africa, especially in India. What about the future? It's not rocket science. Surely we can beat malaria. We know what causes it. There are trials of vaccines underway. What if we, instead of genetically engineering a tomato, what if we genetically engineered a mosquito so that it can't carry the parasite? Think about this. What if the person to beat malaria is actually sitting in this room? They're going to do a science degree. They're going to keep going until they find the best way of beating it. Because that is the challenge. It's time to bite back against malaria. Help end malaria. 1 child every 60 seconds dies of it just now. Less than half the money needed to treat it is actually available every year just now. What do we need? Pressure, votes, money, campaign, information, education. It's time to bite back, and I believe you are the generation to do it. Thank you.
This is our tuberculosis clinic, and the facilities here have been temporary, but yet we've been using them for 12 years now. This is a typical example of one of our wards. This is the female inpatient ward, and you can see it's very roughly constructed from this thatching and mud exteriors. If we go inside, you can see that the ladies here, they're very young. And that is one of the key messages, that tuberculosis is not a disease of the elderly, it's a disease of young people and very much a disease of women. 50% of these women would die untreated, but with treatment we would expect that almost everyone here will be cured and go home. But these facilities are really very unsuitable for treating infectious tuberculosis. When patients come to our clinic, the first thing is to ask them about their symptoms, and if their symptoms fit with what may be a diagnosis of tuberculosis, the way to prove it definitely is to get a sputum sample. And we collect 3 sputum samples, examine them under the microscopes that we have here in the clinic, and so they will know within a day or so whether they do have tuberculosis or not. If they have tuberculosis, then the treatment is really very straightforward. It is oral medicines, but it must be taken for 8 months in duration. So they have to be registered. There's a lot of paperwork involved because we must make sure that the patients take every single dose of their medicine. Far too commonly, patients will take a few doses, feel better, stop their medicines, and then that is the way in which we can breed drug resistance, which is such a danger in countries like Nepal.
This is the big danger of tuberculosis, that people do not finish their treatment. If they fail to finish the treatment, they will become resistant to the drugs, as has happened with penicillin, which is why patients being treated by INF have the system of taking their drugs under supervision from a nurse. This method is called DOTS. It is the way of making sure that people do take their treatment. With this method, many more people are being healed from tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis is spread not by a bite, not by touching someone. It's spread through the air from one person to the next. So you can imagine in an enclosed space, even in this enclosed space, we're breathing in other people's expired air. You're sharing the air round about you, whether you like it or not. And if we were in another country, it's quite possible there would be TB bacilli in that air, made worse with coughing and sneezing, as you can see in this picture. In different countries, tuberculosis is known by different names. And here you can see meat drying in the sun. And when it's dried, it's called sukuti in Nepali, which means, funnily enough, dried up meat. But it's also the word locally used for tuberculosis, because TB dries you out, shrivels you up. In our country, it was known as consumption, and you may have read books where that has been mentioned. I've mentioned already that disease of tuberculosis is very much a disease of young people. And you can see here, this is the folk that were in one of my inpatient wards. They had resistant tuberculosis, and so they've had TB, been treated, and had TB again, which is very hard to treat. And look at how young they all are. TB is primarily a disease of the lungs, although it can affect any part of the body. So examining the lungs and asking about symptoms is one of the first ways. A troublesome cough, often with phlegm and often flecked with blood, is the characteristic sign. And the first thing you must do is take a sample. And here we're seeing a sample of nice green, thick sputum being spread onto a slide, being taken to the nearest microscope. Treatment takes 8 months, so very, very long treatment is required. So it's very important that we inform people and that they're well educated about the disease so it can be detected early, and then when they have it, that they take the treatment through to the final point. That's a very brief history of what tuberculosis is. Thank you.